Between 1847 and 1852, three prominent plantation families along the Mississippi River Valley of southern Louisiana suffered complete ruin under circumstances so disturbing that local newspapers refused to print the full accounts. 23 people died across these estates, some from fever, others from accidents that defied explanation, and several under conditions the parish coroner described only as unnatural cessation of vital functions. The common thread binding these tragedies remained hidden in ledgers, letters and testimonies that judges ordered sealed for over a century. At the center of every catastrophe stood one woman, her name appearing in ownership papers, household inventories, and eventually in criminal proceedings, yet whose true story was deliberately obscured by families, desperate to protect their reputations and by a legal system unwilling to confront what her existence revealed about the foundations of Southern society. Before we continue with the story of Evelyn, a woman whose intelligence and determination would expose the darkest contradictions of antebellum Louisiana. Imagine the stillness of the river country in 1847, the magnolia blossoms, the creaking wharves, and beneath that calm, the quiet machinery of a system built on human bondage. It began as a routine estate transaction that spring, but it would set in motion a chain of events three families tried desperately to stop, even as they found themselves powerless against forces they themselves had created. Jefferson Parish had prospered through the 1840s, its wealth drawn from sugar and cotton, shipped by riverboats to New Orleans. Three families dominated the parish's social landscape. The Henderson family owned Belle Grove, a 2,300-acre plantation worked by 90 enslaved people. Samuel Henderson had arrived from South Carolina in 1838 with family money and connections to the state legislature. His wife, Caroline, came from Virginia and carried herself with aristocratic grace. Their household included 3 children, 2 sons at university and a daughter, Lydia, 19, admired across the parish for her beauty and gentle manners. 5 miles upriver stood Riverside, the home of James Halbrook, 43 parish magistrate and man of political ambition. His wife, Margaret, 10 years younger, managed a household of 4 children with practiced charm. A few miles farther inland, the Crenshaw plantation, known as Oak Hollow, operated with less pretense but greater efficiency under Daniel Crenshaw, a widower of 51. His 3 children were grown, and his estate ran like clockwork under his stern supervision. In April 1847, Samuel Henderson traveled to New Orleans for an estate sale. Among the items being liquidated were 37 enslaved people. One caught his attention, a woman listed as Evelyn, approximately 24 years old, described as house-trained, literate, skilled in needlework and music, fluent in French and English. The listing bore a peculiar note. Her sale was by special decree, requiring that the buyer take her at least 100 miles from the city. The price was remarkably low, $400, when women of her skill and refinement typically sold for $100–200 or more. Henderson's interest was practical. His wife wished for someone who could train their daughter in French conversation and social graces. A French-speaking servant would raise Lydia's standing among neighboring planters' daughters while serving as a household ornament. The low price and the distance requirement suggested complications, but the auction agent assured him it was merely an estate technicality. Henderson purchased Evelyn and arranged her transport to Jefferson Parish. When she arrived at Belle Grove 3 weeks later, Caroline Henderson expressed immediate satisfaction. Evelyn was tall, light-skinned, and carried herself with quiet composure. She spoke with measured deference and displayed flawless etiquette. Caroline assigned her to assist Lydia in needlework and language lessons. For 6 weeks, everything ran smoothly. Evelyn proved capable, discreet, and remarkably skilled at managing the household's rhythms. But by June, subtle changes began to stir. Lydia grew increasingly attached to Evelyn, lingering during lessons, whispering, then falling silent when others approached. Servants moved more cautiously. Conversations became strained. Unbeknownst to anyone, Evelyn had begun asking questions about cotton prices, debts, which planters paid on time, which sons gambled or drank too freely. Each inquiry seemed harmless on its own, but together they formed a meticulous map of the parish's power structure. She learned that Samuel Henderson kept a ledger of gambling debts locked in his study, She saw that Caroline's refinement hid deep financial anxiety. Most importantly, she observed that young Lydia possessed a romantic heart and a naive understanding of the world, a weakness Evelyn could cultivate. By July, Evelyn had become indispensable. Caroline depended on her for social arrangements. Samuel appreciated her precision in running the household. Lydia treated her as a confidant. The other servants accepted her quietly, unaware they were all becoming pieces on Evelyn's board. On the night of July 14, 1847, Samuel sat in his study, the lamplight flickering over his ledgers, revealing numbers that confirmed what he feared. His finances were collapsing. Evelyn entered to deliver coffee. As she turned to leave, she paused. "Sir, if I may be so bold," she said softly, "I overheard you mention the Holbrook family at dinner. I once served in a household in New Orleans that had dealings with Mr. Holbrook's brother. There are matters concerning that family's finances you might find useful to know." Samuel looked up sharply. "What matters?" Evelyn spoke calmly, describing failed speculations, concealed debts, and partnerships Holbrook had hidden from the public. Her information was too precise to dismiss. She recited names, dates, and transactions with the precision of a clerk. Samuel should have questioned how a servant knew such things, but desperation silenced caution. Within an hour, he had decided to use her intelligence to coerce Holbrook into a partnership that could rescue his own fortune. What he didn't realize was that Evelyn had just bound him to her, another man drawn into the intricate web she had spun for years, because Evelyn had been sold with that peculiar distance clause for a reason. In New Orleans, authorities had begun to notice a pattern. 3 families who had once owned her had all met ruin, financial collapse, unexplained deaths, public disgrace. They couldn't prove anything, so they ordered her removed from the parish, hoping distance would break the pattern. They were wrong. That night, as thunder cracked over the river, the great oak in front of Belle Grove split down the middle. It was said later that storm marked the beginning of a sequence of tragedies that would stain 3 families for generations. Samuel Henderson's scheme began the following week. On July 22nd, he rode upriver to Riverside under the pretense of discussing equipment investments. The summer air hung heavy, the river swollen from recent rains. James Holbrook greeted him warmly in his parlor, unaware the conversation about to unfold would set fire to every certainty he possessed. After polite exchanges, Samuel mentioned rumors about land speculation Holbrook had undertaken 2 years earlier. He described the venture's collapse in remarkable detail, losses, dates, names of creditors. Holbrook's expression tightened. The information was accurate and private. No one beyond his bookkeeper should have known. If such talk spread, his post as magistrate would be untenable. Samuel smiled thinly. "We are both men with reputations to preserve," he said. "Perhaps we might form a partnership, cotton factoring. Mutually protective of our interests and good names." It was blackmail dressed as business. Holbrook recognized it instantly. Yet within half an hour they had signed a rough agreement. Holbrook would invest $3,000 in Henderson's operation. Henderson would use his legislative contacts to promote Holbrook's political ambitions. Both left the meeting convinced they had outwitted the other. Only Evelyn had truly won. She received Samuel's report with calm satisfaction, offering no explanation of how she knew what she knew. The truth was simple. Months of patient listening among enslaved workers who moved between plantations had given her a network of information the planters never imagined existed. Messages traveled invisibly with every shipment and errand. By late July, whispers drifted through Belle Grove's slave quarters. The cook, Bess, muttered warnings to the others. "That woman ain't right," she said. "I seen one like her in New Orleans. My cousin worked that house. Said families fell apart after she came. People died. Nothing proven. Most dismissed Bess's fears. Evelyn had done nothing wrong, only earned the master's trust. What they could not see was that she had already begun the second phase of her plan. Lydia Henderson, impressionable and yearning for romance, had become Evelyn's focus. Each afternoon's French lesson turned gradually into conversation about the world beyond the plantation. Evelyn spoke of Parisian salons, women who conversed freely with scholars and artists, women who chose their own futures. Then she turned the talk toward Lydia's own confinement. "You and I are not so different," she told her one humid afternoon as cicadas droned outside. "Both of us possessions traded by men. The difference is price, not principle." Lydia blinked, uncertain. "But you are enslaved," she whispered. "And you, Miss Lydia," Evelyn replied gently, "will be sold in marriage to settle your father's debts." "Has anyone asked your wishes?" Lydia's cheeks flushed. "How could you know that?" "I keep accounts for your mother. I see letters your father receives. There is talk of the Crenshaw boy at Oak Hollow. His family's fortune could steady your father's." It wasn't entirely true, but Lydia believed her. The thought that her life might be traded like an asset planted resentment. Evelyn carefully tended. By August, Lydia's journal, once filled with embroidery sketches, now contained reflections on injustice and freedom, phrases subtly echoing Evelyn's language. Meanwhile, the partnership between Henderson and Halbrook began to sour. The cotton market shifted. Transport costs rose. Samuel's debts deepened faster than he admitted. Evelyn chose her moment to intervene again. One evening she appeared at his study door, candlelight flickering across her calm face. "Sir, I fear Mr. Halbrook speaks ill of you in private," she said softly. "He tells others you gamble, that you borrowed against future crops you cannot deliver." Samuel's temper ignited. "He said that?" "I wish it were untrue," she answered, lowering her eyes. "But I thought you should know." The next morning, Samuel confronted Halbrook publicly at a parish agricultural meeting. Voices rose, accusations flew. Two pillars of society descended into a shouting match before half the county. Their quarrel became instant scandal. Exactly as Evelyn intended. While rumor spread, Lydia disappeared. On the morning of September 18, 1847, her bed was empty, her writing desk open. A note remained. "I will not be bartered like property. I go to make my own fate." The phrasing, natural rights, self-determination, was unlike anything Lydia had written before. Caroline collapsed in hysteria. Samuel ordered riders in every direction. Enslaved servants were interrogated, some whipped. Evelyn wept convincingly and insisted she knew nothing. Search parties scoured swamps and ferries for 3 weeks. Posters offered rewards. No trace of Lydia appeared. Halbrook fanned gossip that Henderson's household had fallen into moral decay. The truth was crueler. Lydia had not run away alone. Evelyn had spent months preparing her escape through a quiet network of free blacks and sympathetic sailors in New Orleans. Lydia believed she was asserting independence. In fact, she had been maneuvered into an act that would destroy her family's standing and keep Samuel distracted while Evelyn set her sights elsewhere. In late September, Daniel Crenshaw visited Belle Grove to discuss a possible trade of equipment and labor. He met Evelyn in passing, tall, composed, her eyes intelligent. She answered his casual question about crop yields with such precision that he later remarked, "That woman understands farming better than half the overseers in this parish." A month later, Crenshaw returned with an offer. His plantation lacked a refined house servant. He was willing to pay handsomely for one of Evelyn's skill. Henderson, desperate for money and half mad with worry over Lydia, agreed. The transaction closed on October 3, 1847 for $900, more than twice her purchase price. When the wagon carrying her left Belle Grove, rain had begun again, streaking the white columns like tears. Behind her lay a family undone. Lydia vanished, Samuel's finances ruined, Caroline's health broken. From the kitchen doorway, Bess crossed herself and whispered, "Lord, have mercy on the Crenshaws. That woman carries ruin like a fever." Evelyn sat upright on the wagon bench, hands folded in her lap, expression unreadable. Ahead lay Oak Hollow, the next chapter in her quiet war. The October rains came early that year, turning the roads between Jefferson Parish and the inland plantations into narrow channels of mud. By the time Evelyn reached Oak Hollow, Daniel Crenshaw's estate sat shrouded in gray mist, its fields still humming with the machinery of harvest. The great house, built of pale cypress, looked stern and unadorned compared to Belle Grove's elegance, just like its master. Daniel Crenshaw ran Oak Hollow with austere precision. Since his wife's death 5 years earlier, he had stripped the plantation of every social pretense. No balls, no visiting parties, no music in the evenings. His days revolved around ledgers and machinery, his nights around correspondence with factors in New Orleans. His 3 children, Margaret, William, and Samuel Jr., had grown into adults who mirrored his seriousness. Margaret, 23, managed the household. William, 21, oversaw field operations. And Samuel, the youngest at 19, studied accounting under his father's watchful eye. When Evelyn entered this world, she knew at once that charm and refinement would not move Daniel Crenshaw. He valued competence above all, so she adjusted. Within days of her arrival, she began managing the household with quiet efficiency, organizing inventories, repairing linen accounts, and streamlining supply orders. She found ways to save Daniel money without drawing attention to herself, and that was precisely how she gained it. Margaret Crenshaw noticed first. She had handled the household for years and didn't welcome interference. Yet her father seemed increasingly to consult Evelyn, even about matters of crop rotation and cotton prices. "Father," Margaret said, one chilly November evening, "don't you find it strange that this woman knows so much more than one would expect from a servant? The Henderson family collapsed right after they bought her." Daniel dismissed her concerns with impatience. "Henderson ruined himself through gambling. This woman is efficient, nothing more. I'll not indulge gossip." But Margaret began watching Evelyn carefully. She noticed how the woman's eyes followed conversations, how she asked questions about local merchants, how she seemed to know which planters were overextended. There was something unnerving about her calm, like a chess player who already knew the outcome of the game. Evelyn, meanwhile, was learning everything she needed. Oak Hollow's books told a quiet story. Though the plantation looked prosperous, small irregularities in Daniel's borrowing suggested hidden pressure. The debts weren't large, just enough to keep operations running between harvests, but the interest rates were high. By December, she had uncovered the truth. Daniel was financing the secret purchase of additional riverfront acreage, gambling that cotton prices would stay high long enough to pay off the loans. If prices fell, the entire estate could collapse. She said nothing, for now. Patience was her weapon. In mid-January 1848, opportunity arrived in the form of James Halbrook. The Henderson-Halbrook partnership had failed spectacularly. Halbrook's creditors were closing in, and he needed new alliances to restore his standing. Knowing Daniel Crenshaw's reputation for sound management, he rode to Oak Hollow proposing a joint venture. Evelyn was present when Halbrook visited. She served refreshments, appearing inattentive while absorbing every word. Halbrook offered generous terms, far too generous, a sign of desperation. When he left, she waited until evening and then spoke quietly to Daniel. "Sir," she began, "I do not mean to intrude on matters above my station, but when I served at Belle Grove, I saw what that man did to his partners. He ruined Mr. Henderson with deceit and trickery. I fear he will do the same to you." It was the perfect reversal. Months earlier, she had told Henderson that Halbrook's dealings were a way to salvation. Now she told Crenshaw the opposite. The contradiction could never be discovered. The men hated each other too deeply to compare notes. Daniel frowned. "You claim to know his reputation?" "I witnessed it, sir," Evelyn said, lowering her gaze. "He uses charm and flattery to gain trust, then twists agreements until they serve him alone." Over the following days, she seeded doubt with casual precision. Mr. Halbrook's handwriting trembled when he signed the contract, as though guilt weighed his hand. He asked many questions about your land, perhaps too many. By the time Daniel made his decision, he was convinced Halbrook's proposal was a trap. He rejected the offer coldly. Halbrook left humiliated and furious, muttering that someone had poisoned Crenshaw against him. Evelyn had now achieved what she desired. Hostility between Halbrook and Crenshaw added to the ruin of the Hendersons. But her plan required more than rivalry. She needed the Crenshaws to destroy themselves from within. Her chance came through William, Daniel's eldest son. William was handsome, ambitious, and, unlike his father, romantic. He had been secretly courting Anna Pritchard the daughter of a merchant from Baton Rouge. The match was beneath the family's social rank, but William planned to marry her regardless. Evelyn learned of the affair from field workers who carried letters between the lovers. By mid-February, she knew everything: meeting times, promises, even plans for a March wedding. On February 19, 1848, she set her trap. A letter from Anna arrived by courier. Evelyn ensured it reached Daniel, not William. She pretended confusion, delivering it among the day's correspondence as though unaware of its contents. Daniel opened it idly and froze. The letter spoke tenderly of their marriage 2 weeks earlier and of a child soon expected. That evening, the confrontation shook Oak Hollow. Daniel's fury echoed through the halls. "You married that shopkeeper's daughter?" he thundered. William stood pale but defiant. "I did. I love her." "Love?" Daniel spat. "You have ruined this family's name." Within the hour, he disinherited his son, ordered him off the property, and forbade contact with any member of the household. Margaret and young Samuel pleaded in vain. William left before dawn, stripped of inheritance and family. Evelyn watched from an upstairs window as his horse disappeared into the fog. One brother cast out, one father disgraced. Another piece fell. The next blow came a month later. On March 28, 1848, a man named Josiah Fletcher arrived from New Orleans, claiming to represent creditors holding Daniel's private notes. Evelyn had sent word to the right ears. Fletcher demanded immediate repayment of $8,000, more than Daniel possessed. The timing was perfect. With William gone and debts exposed, Daniel had no choice but to sell 20 enslaved workers, many of them families who had lived at Oak Hollow for generations. The auction was brutal. Parents separated from children, husbands from wives. The cries of loss echoed across the yard long after the wagons rolled away. Evelyn stood on the veranda, face expressionless. Every act of destruction brought her closer to balance, her mind against the system that had enslaved it. Margaret Crenshaw, watching from the shadows, saw something in Evelyn's calm she could not mistake. Calculation. Later that night, she confronted her in the hallway. "You did this," she said. "My father's ruin, my brother's exile, all of it. You arranged it." Evelyn met her gaze. "Miss Margaret, I am a piece of property. I have no power to arrange anything." "You're lying," Margaret hissed, "and one day I'll prove it." Evelyn smiled faintly. "To prove that, you would have to admit that your family was undone by a woman you claim has no power. Could your pride bear that truth?" Margaret had no answer. She turned away, trembling with fury and helplessness. By April, 3 families, Henderson, Holbrook, and Crenshaw, had all suffered reverses that would take generations to repair. And in the middle of each disaster stood one woman, calm, composed, and legally invisible. By late spring of 1848, whispers were spreading through Jefferson Parish. 3 once prosperous families, the Hendersons, the Holbrooks, and the Crenshaws, had all fallen into scandal and misfortune within a single year. The pattern was impossible to ignore, yet no one dared speak it plainly. Servants murmured that the pale woman from New Orleans carried a curse. Planters shook their heads and said nothing. Daniel Crenshaw tried to restore order at Oak Hollow, but his authority was slipping. Margaret ran the household with a rigid grace born of desperation, while young Samuel moved about in silence, his eyes haunted by the ruin around him. And through it all, Evelyn remained composed, performing her duties as if nothing had changed. Her presence soothed Daniel even as it unnerved his daughter. By June, the cotton crop showed promise, and Daniel threw himself into work. But Evelyn noticed the strain in his movements, the restless pacing at night, the way he lingered by his study window staring toward the river. His mind was unraveling, just as Henderson's had months before. Meanwhile, in town, James Holbrook was near collapse. The failure of his partnership with Henderson and the rejection by Crenshaw had left him financially and socially ruined. His debts in New Orleans had mounted, and his creditors were calling. He brooded alone at Riverside, convinced some malign force had orchestrated his misfortunes. In truth, he was not wrong. He simply didn't understand its nature. In early July, Halbrook heard that Daniel Crenshaw's servant, the woman from Belle Grove, had again become indispensable in her new household. Her reputation for uncanny intelligence reached even his remaining acquaintances. One evening, half drunk and desperate, he told a friend, "That woman is the root of it all. She whispers in men's ears and turns them against each other." The remark would set in motion events even Evelyn could not fully control. By August, Halbrook's bitterness hardened into obsession. He began tracing the woman's past, visiting New Orleans to review estate sale records. What he found chilled him. Each family that had owned her, one in Baton Rouge, another in Plaquemines Parish, and now 3 in Jefferson, had ended in financial or personal ruin within 3 years of her purchase. To Halbrook, it was proof of something supernatural. He returned home determined to have her removed. "If the law won't stop her," he told a local sheriff, "I'll see to it myself." At Oak Hollow, Evelyn sensed the danger long before it reached her doorstep. She noticed strange riders near the fields, heard murmurs from laborers returning from town. The tension thrilled her, a test of the order she had so carefully constructed. That August, the skies turned oppressive, heat pressing down like a hand. Daniel grew more irritable, his finances tightening further as the market fluctuated. Evelyn maintained her perfect calm. When Margaret tried to speak to her father about the strange unease around the estate, Daniel silenced her. "You've imagined it," he said sharply. "The woman has done nothing but serve faithfully." But Margaret saw the change in the other servants, the glances, the whispered prayers. They knew something was coming. On the night of September 14th, 1848, it came. 4 men rode up from the river road, faces hidden, guns beneath their coats. They tethered their horses in the trees and crept toward the servants' quarters. Their orders were simple: seize Evelyn, bind her, and take her south to Texas, where she would be sold quietly beyond reach of her supposed influence. Halbrook had paid them well for the task. What the men didn't know was that Evelyn had anticipated the move. 2 nights earlier, she'd gathered the field workers and told them, "They will come for me, and if they do, they mean harm to this plantation as well as to me." Whether they defended her out of fear, loyalty, or a strange respect for her courage, no one could later say. When the 4 intruders burst through the door, they were met by a dozen men armed with hoes, sickles, and clubs. The fight was short and brutal. One attacker's jaw was shattered, another struck down with a shovel. The remaining 2 fled into the darkness, one bleeding badly. The commotion drew Daniel from his house with a shotgun. Seeing the wounded stranger in the yard, he shouted, "Who sent you?" But the man only groaned before losing consciousness. By dawn, the sheriff had arrived. Under questioning, the injured man confessed that Halbrook had organized the abduction. The scandal exploded across the parish. Halbrook was arrested and charged, not for attempted murder, but for theft of property, the property being Evelyn herself. The irony did not escape anyone. In court records, she appeared not as a conspirator or victim, but as evidence. When Daniel learned of Halbrook's arrest, his pride flared. "No man steals from me," he declared. "Whatever she's done, she's mine." Yet Evelyn's composure unsettled even him. She seemed almost pleased by the outcome. She had predicted every move, controlled every consequence. In a single night, she had turned herself from a servant into a symbol, someone too dangerous for others to challenge, yet too valuable for her master to lose. For Halbrook, the humiliation was complete. A magistrate charged with theft of another man's slave, his reputation was finished. He sat in his cell muttering that she was a devil, not a woman. "She made me ruin myself," he said. "She made all of us ruin ourselves." Back at Oak Hollow, life resumed under a strained peace. Evelyn continued her duties with flawless serenity, as though nothing had happened. Daniel's dependence on her deepened. He trusted her with accounts, correspondence, even private letters. Margaret watched helplessly as her father drifted further into Evelyn's orbit. But Evelyn's triumph was not yet complete. There remained one task, a final, intimate undoing that would destroy the Crenshaws entirely. That winter, she began to focus her quiet charm on young Samuel. The boy was 19, sensitive, idealistic, and lonely after his brother's exile and his sister's cold vigilance. He saw in Evelyn not a servant, but a tragic figure, an intelligent woman trapped by injustice. She encouraged his sympathy, listened to his questions about morality, and told him stories of the free black communities in the North where men and women lived as equals. "You don't belong here," he said one night in a whisper. "Neither do you," she replied. Softly, by December, the boy's pity had become love. Evelyn fostered it with careful restraint, gentle looks, brief touches, never enough to provoke Daniel's suspicion. She knew what she was doing. Love was a lever, and Samuel was the last piece of leverage she would ever need. Through the winter of 1848, Oak Hollow existed in a fragile stillness, like a plantation holding its breath. The failed abduction, the debts, the quarrels, all had left Daniel Crenshaw weary and withdrawn. Margaret kept to her books. Only Samuel seemed alive with secret purpose, slipping out at night and returning with a new fire in his eyes. Evelyn had lit that fire, and she fed it daily. In the lamplight of the pantry or the quiet of the veranda, she spoke to him of things he had never dared imagine. She told him about cities in the North where people of color could own property, where a man's worth was not measured by what he owned, but by what he knew. She painted freedom not as rebellion, but as moral clarity. "Your heart tells you this world is wrong," she said one night. "You feel it every time you see a child sold away or a man whipped for speaking. That feeling is truth, Samuel. Do not silence it." Her voice carried no seduction, only conviction, but that made it more dangerous. By February, Samuel had confessed his love. Evelyn received his words with quiet sadness, neither encouraging nor rejecting them. "Love cannot exist between what is owned and what owns," she said. "If you truly love me, you would give me freedom, not affection." The idea took hold of him like fever. He began to imagine himself her rescuer, the one man who could redeem her suffering and prove his moral worth. He started planning, first in thought, then in action. By late October 1848, Evelyn judged the time right. She approached Samuel one evening, her expression grave. "I have learned something terrible," she whispered. "Mr. Halbrook's friends still plan to harm me. They say I will testify against him. They intend to silence me before the trial," Samuel paled. "We can warn my father." "No," she interrupted softly. "He will not believe. He trusts his world more than me. The only way to keep me safe is to help me leave. North, to freedom." She placed her hand on his arm. "Just once, just long enough. You are the only good man I have ever known, Samuel." The decision consumed him. Over the following week, he gathered supplies, studied routes whispered among abolitionists, and secured a small boat for the river passage north. He even forged travel papers using his father's letterhead. Evelyn guided him, letting him believe he was leading. On the night of November 3rd, 1848, she betrayed him completely. She went to Daniel's study, her eyes wide with practiced fear. "Sir," she said, "I wish I had not discovered this, but I cannot be silent. Your son means to flee the state with me. I found the forged papers. He has planned your ruin." She placed the forged documents on the desk. Every mark, every signature was Samuel's hand. Daniel's face drained of color. "He intends to steal you?" Evelyn lowered her gaze. "I believe he means to free me, sir, but such an act would disgrace your family and break the law. I thought you should know." Within the hour, Daniel confronted his son. The shouting shook the walls. Samuel confessed everything: his love, his plans, his forged papers. He fell to his knees, begging his father to let Evelyn go. "She deserves freedom," he cried. "She is more worthy than any of us." Daniel struck him. "You are mad," he said, trembling with rage. "You are bewitched by your own slave." By morning, Samuel was gone, committed by his father's order to a private asylum near Baton Rouge, officially for nervous instability and delusional attachment to an enslaved woman. That same day, Daniel summoned a trader from New Orleans. He had finally recognized what Margaret had seen months earlier. Evelyn was poison. On November 8, 1848, she was sold for transport to Mississippi. The trader chained her to a coffle of 15 others bound for the deeper South. As she stood in the yard for the last time, the household gathered in silence. Margaret watched from the veranda, pale and rigid. Daniel stood at the doorway, arms folded across his chest, unwilling to look her in the eye. Evelyn lifted her chin. "Everything I did," she said softly, "you made necessary." Then she stepped into the wagon without another word. For the first time in a year, Oak Hollow was silent. Daniel believed he had restored order, but Evelyn had left behind something more powerful than her presence. Ideas. Words whispered into Samuel's heart, doubts sown in Margaret's mind, and a network of servants who still spoke her name with awe. 2 weeks later, the first blow fell. On November 23, 1848, James Halbrook was found dead in his study at Riverside, shot through the head, a pistol still in his hand. The coroner ruled suicide. A note lay on the desk. "I am undone by my own weakness," but Margaret Halbrook refused to believe it. Her husband had spoken confidently of appealing his case. The wound, she noted, was on the left temple, though he was right-handed. More disturbing, several financial documents had vanished, papers linking Halbrook's creditors to the Crenshaw estate. Sheriff Blanchard investigated briefly, found the doors locked from within, and closed the case. "Suicide, plain as day," he said, eager to end a scandal that touched every major family in the parish. But rumor would not die. Within a week, talk spread that Halbrook had been driven to despair by the same woman now sold to Mississippi. The servants whispered of curses and vengeance. Margaret Halbrook, refusing to rest, hired a private investigator from New Orleans, Abraham Cornwall, a former Pinkerton agent, to uncover the truth. Cornwall arrived in December and began interviewing everyone connected to the 3 estates. He spoke to Bess from Belle Grove, to field hands from Oak Hollow, to the sheriff who had arrested Halbrook. Piece by piece, he assembled a terrifying mosaic. His report, completed before Christmas, stated, "The woman known as Evelyn has systematically destroyed 5 families across Louisiana and Mississippi through manipulation, deception, and the weaponization of truth. She commits no crime that law recognizes, yet her intelligence and control of human weakness make her more dangerous than any murderer." When Cornwall showed his findings to the parish judge, the man sighed and said, "How do you prosecute a piece of property for intelligence?" By then, Evelyn was already gone, sold again, this time westward. Yet her influence lingered like smoke after fire. Back at Oak Hollow, Daniel Crenshaw received word of Halbrook's death and turned ashen. "The devil herself," he muttered. "Even gone, she destroys us." He was right. The worst was yet to come. Winter descended over Jefferson Parish like a gray shroud. The river fog thickened, and the sound of distant gins working through the night echoed across empty fields. Within the mansions of the parish's ruling families, only fear stirred. No one spoke Evelyn's name aloud anymore, yet every tragedy, every misfortune seemed to carry her ghost. At Oak Hollow, Daniel Crenshaw aged 10 years in as many weeks. His hair turned white at the temples, and his temper grew vicious. The guilt of committing his youngest son to confinement gnawed at him. He avoided Margaret's eyes. Every time he passed the window overlooking the slave quarters, he thought of that calm voice saying, "Everything I did, you made necessary." In early January 1849, word arrived from Baton Rouge. Samuel showed little improvement. Doctors described him as silent, withdrawn, a patient who speaks only in fragments of moral philosophy. Margaret read the report aloud and saw her father flinch. On January 17, 1849, tragedy returned. Daniel rose before dawn to inspect the Cotton Gin House, a building he'd entered 1,000 times. Workers later heard a heavy thud, then the scream of machinery. When they reached him, it was too late. The cotton press had been activated while he stood inside, crushing him instantly. The coroner ruled it an accident. Margaret did not believe it for a moment. Her father had designed that very machine. He knew every lever and gear. Someone had pulled the start chain deliberately. Among those who had seen Daniel that morning was a field hand recently returned from Mississippi. He claimed to be delivering a message from the trader who had purchased Evelyn. According to the man, she had sent greetings and asked that Mr. Crenshaw be informed she was at peace now. The messenger vanished the next day and was never found. Margaret went straight to Sheriff Blanchard. "You think she had nothing to do with it?" she demanded. The sheriff sighed heavily. Miss Crenshaw, I've known your father 20 years. I believe he was murdered, but by law I cannot accuse a woman who's hundreds of miles away. And even if she did arrange it, how do I prove such a thing? The law doesn't recognize thought as a weapon. Margaret left in silence, rage and grief twisting together inside her. That evening she wrote to Margaret Halbrook, whose husband's death still hung unresolved. The two women met within a week at Riverside, both dressed in mourning black. Together they read Cornwall's full report by lamplight. She is a strategist, the investigator had written. Her mind works like a general's. She studies her enemy's weaknesses and destroys him using only truth. The report's final page suggested Evelyn had been sold to a plantation in northern Mississippi. If you seek justice, Cornwall wrote, begin there, but do not expect law to help you. The two widows, one by blood, one by ruin, resolved to pursue her themselves. They pooled their savings and hired Cornwall again, this time not as investigator but as tracker. He followed Evelyn's trail through Mississippi, Arkansas, and finally into eastern Texas, where she had been sold to a planter named Henry Dalton. In March 1849, Cornwall found her there and requested permission to interview her for legal purposes. Dalton agreed out of curiosity. For 2 hours, Cornwall sat across from the woman whose name had haunted half the South. She was calm, articulate, unrepentant. I never lied, she told him. Every word I spoke to those men was true. I simply revealed the truths they wished to hide. You caused deaths, Cornwall said. Families ruined, lives destroyed. I did not cause them, she replied. I allowed them to happen. The difference is the measure of hypocrisy. Her explanation chilled him. Why, he asked finally. She smiled faintly. Because they believed they owned me. I showed them what ownership truly costs. Cornwall left Texas shaken. His written account, sent back to Jefferson Parish, contained the passage that would later be quoted in newspapers. She wields intellect as a weapon and conscience as her shield. The law cannot touch her, for it denies her existence as a moral being while she proves that denial false. He urged Dalton to keep her under watch. Dalton refused. She's my property, he said curtly. She works well and causes no trouble. That's all I care to know. In April, Cornwall returned to Louisiana with his report, presenting it to the parish judge and a small committee of legislators in Baton Rouge. The men listened uneasily as he described her pattern, the repeated sales, the inevitable destruction, the impossibility of prosecution. What charge would we bring? The judge asked finally. Conspiracy? Against whom? She is legally incapable of intent. One legislator murmured. If we admit a slave can plan crimes, we admit she possesses reason. And if she possesses reason, how can we keep her enslaved? No one answered. They filed Cornwall's report away and adjourned in silence. That night, a messenger arrived from Baton Rouge carrying more dreadful news. Samuel Crenshaw was dead. He had been found hanging from the rafters of his cell. The asylum physician reported suicide. Margaret received the letter with trembling hands. Her brother, her father, her family, gone. She collapsed into grief that bordered on madness. When she recovered, grief hardened into fury. On May 15, 1849, she packed a pistol, hired a driver, and left for Texas. She told no one her true purpose. Justice was all she said. The journey was long and brutal, 3 weeks through swamps and blistering plains. At every stop she asked for Dalton's plantation. When she finally arrived, the overseer eyed her warily. You're looking for the Creole woman, he said. You're too late. Dalton sold her 2 weeks ago to a cotton factor out of New Orleans. Name of George Marshall. Margaret felt her blood run cold. Where did Marshall take her? To his client, a widow near Lake Pontchartrain. He squinted, recalling. Mrs. Elise Delacroix, I think. Bought her for house service. Margaret gripped the carriage door for balance. The name was one she knew. The Delacroix family had once owned plantations near Baton Rouge, and rumor said Evelyn had been with them years ago before the pattern began. The circle was closing. She traveled straight to New Orleans, then north along the Lake Road until she reached the Delacroix estate. The widow received her politely, her French accent soft but firm. You have come for the woman, Elise said. I wondered who would arrive first. You know what she's done? Margaret demanded. Elise nodded. My first husband knew it too well. She destroyed him 10 years ago. That is why I purchased her. To understand her, not to punish her. She is writing her confession now. Margaret froze. Her what? Her full account, Elise said. 80 pages, perhaps more. She tells everything, the families, the motives, the methods. I intend to preserve it. Margaret's rage trembled beneath her composure. I came to kill her. Elise met her gaze evenly. Then perhaps you should hear her first. Moments later, the door opened, and Evelyn entered the room. She wore a simple gray dress, her hair bound neatly, her posture proud. When she saw Margaret, her expression softened. Not fear, not defiance, but something almost sorrowful. I knew someone would come, she said quietly. I did not know it would be you. The air inside the Delacroix parlor was thick with candle smoke and jasmine. Outside, Lake Pontchartrain shimmered beneath the moonlight, black and still as polished glass. Margaret Crenshaw stood rooted to the floor, her pistol hidden in the folds of her traveling cloak, her pulse drumming in her ears. Across from her sat the woman who had destroyed her life and, by some twisted grace, now spoke as though expecting judgment. Evelyn gestured toward a chair. Please, she said softly, sit. You have come far, and I think you deserve to hear everything. Margaret did not move. You took everything from me, she said. My father, my brother, my name. I took nothing that wasn't already broken, Evelyn replied. I only revealed the cracks. Her voice was low, calm, too calm. On the writing table beside her lay a stack of pages bound with ribbon, her so-called confession. Candlelight caught the neat lines of ink. You've been writing this? Margaret asked bitterly. Yes, Evelyn said. For Madame Delacroix. She believes that truth, once written, cannot be silenced. I write so the world will understand why I did what I did. You call it understanding? Margaret's voice broke. You ruined 5 families. You turned men into monsters. And you call it truth? Evelyn looked at her with weary eyes. Do you know what truth is, Miss Crenshaw? It is the thing that kills illusions. I was born into a world built on lies, that God favored one color over another, that men were noble masters, that women were delicate and pure. I simply reminded your fathers of what they truly were. They did the rest themselves. Margaret's hand trembled on the pistol. You think that excuses you? No, Evelyn said. It explains me. She rose slowly, moving to the window where moonlight spilled across her face. When I belonged to Belle Grove, I believed submission would save me. It did not. When I belonged to Oak Hollow, I believed intelligence would protect me. It did not. So I chose power. Not through violence, but through knowledge. And knowledge turned out to be the sharpest blade of all. Margaret's fury cracked into grief. My brother loved you, she said. He thought he could save you. Evelyn's eyes flickered. And he almost did. He was good, too good. That is why I told your father. Because goodness in such a world cannot survive. It becomes another form of cruelty. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. The silence between them seemed to hum. Outside, the wind shifted over the lake, rustling the reeds. Finally, Margaret said, Then why write this confession? Why speak now? Evelyn turned from the window. Because I am tired. And because stories, especially the terrible ones, must be told by those who lived them, or they will be twisted by those who didn't. She lifted the pages and placed them gently on the table between them. This is my truth. Take it if you wish. Burn it if you must. Margaret's hand moved inside her cloak. Her voice was barely a whisper. You think I came here to forgive you? I think you came here to end something, Evelyn said. Whether it is me or your grief, I do not know. The pistol gleamed in candlelight. Evelyn did not flinch. If you kill me, you will prove everything I've written, she said softly. That cruelty is the only language this world understands. Margaret's breath shook. The gun wavered. For an instant, she saw her brother's gentle eyes, her father's proud face, her family's ruined home. Then she lowered the weapon, tears blurring her vision. I wish I could hate you, she whispered. Evelyn stepped closer, her voice almost tender. You already do. But hate, Miss Crenshaw, is another form of love. It binds us as tightly as blood. Margaret stumbled back, horrified by the strange pity in the woman's eyes. She dropped the pistol onto the carpet, and fled into the night. By morning, she was gone from Louisiana entirely. She would settle years later in Tennessee under another name, never marrying, never speaking of that night again. Evelyn remained at the Delacroix estate, finishing her manuscript. Madame Delacroix kept it locked in a cedar chest, reading it only to select guests, scholars, reformers, abolitionists who passed quietly through New Orleans in those uneasy years before the war. They called it the Testament of a Bonded Mind. In 1852, a yellow fever epidemic swept through the Gulf Coast. Among the dead listed in the parish records was one Evelyn Mulatto, aged about 29. No family claimed her body. She was buried in a potter's field near the lake. Madame Delacroix wept when she heard saying, she was either devil or prophet, and perhaps both. For decades afterward, strange coincidences followed the reading of her manuscript. A merchant who mocked it lost his fortune in a riverboat fire. A judge who dismissed it died in his sleep after quoting one of its lines. Those who claim ownership of others own nothing that will not rot in their hands. The manuscript itself vanished sometime after the war. Some said Union soldiers burned it. Others claimed it was smuggled north and hidden among abolitionist archives. Once, in 1892, a scholar from Boston claimed to have found fragments in an attic near Baton Rouge, pages describing how a woman, without name, without freedom, without mercy, toppled the pillars of her own bondage. The fragments were later lost in a flood. Even now, stories linger in Jefferson Parish. They say that on humid nights when thunder rolls across the lake, a woman's voice can be heard whispering through the reeds, calm and deliberate, reciting words no one can quite make out. Fishermen claim the voice always ends the same way. The chains were never mine. Those who hear it speak quietly afterward, unsure whether they've been cursed or absolved. The old families still lower their voices when they speak of the years between 1847 and 1849, the years of fire and ruin, when a single enslaved woman, armed with nothing but her mind, dismantled the world that bound her. Some say Evelyn was a monster. Others call her a martyr, but the records, all the letters, trials, deaths, suggest something simpler and far more terrifying. She was merely human, and that was what made her the most dangerous woman Jefferson Parish had ever known.